Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly tropical weather outlook for today, Sunday, January 19th, 2025. I didn't post a video yesterday as I usually do when it comes to these weekly tropical weather outlooks. I usually do them on Saturday, but I didn't post it yesterday, so we're doing it today on Sunday. I don't think you mind if it's a day late, anyways. It's only one day, but since we're doing it now, let's get started. First off, taking a look at tropical cyclone activity around the globe. As I always say, even if there's not any tropical activity happening right now in the Western Hemisphere because it's winter, there is still activity happening somewhere, and indeed there is just off the northwestern coast of Australia right now in the Southern Hemisphere. That's their current tropical season right now. There is a Cyclone Sean, or Cian, or Sean, I say Sean, seemingly off the northwestern coast of Australia. And we can actually take a look at the track of this storm, and it appears as if this is going to be tracking away from the Australian coast, so no worries of a landfall there. Probably going to get some outer bands as this system moves by, but it's going to move off to the southwest. Got to think, southern hemisphere, it's moving to the south because storms on the southern hemisphere move south away from the equator, while obviously in the northern hemisphere they move north away from the equator. Just, getting the basic logistics in, but it's going to be moving southwest away from Australia, potentially strengthen a little bit into a Category 2 strength system. Looks like it's going to do that in about a day or so, and then it moves off away and eventually weakens. But beyond that, not much happening across the globe. So with that, let's move on to current sea surface temperature anomalies right now, specifically in the Western Hemisphere. I'll look at the Atlantic right now. Very warm, has been warm for the past several weeks, especially in the Eastern Atlantic it's warm, throughout the Caribbean it's warm, and especially in the Gulf of Mexico. Surprisingly, it has not cooled down a lot in the Gulf, something very interesting. And of course, something to watch for the rest of winter, and especially when we get to severe weather season. Obviously, the Gulf being very warm has its own implications for hurricane season, but especially for severe weather season, the warmer the Gulf, the more moisture there is to be dragged up into the southeast and to help stir pretty significant severe weather events, especially by the time we get to March and April during the spring when severe weather season happens. So there's that. The Atlantic remains warm, basically the sum of what's happening. And you could obviously talk about what this means for hurricane season, but the simple truth is that it's too far out. It's literally January 18th, or at least this map was updated as of yesterday, January 18th. The sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic don't truly become that much of a concern for what they mean for hurricane season until we at least get to April. But it is interesting nonetheless, and the only thing I could say for right now is that if this look holds, especially by the time we get to the spring, it'll certainly be an interesting look for hurricane season indeed. Moving on to the Pacific, very cold sea surface temperature anomalies remain. We still have a weak La Nina in place, although very interestingly enough, we're starting to see some of these warm anomalies begin to appear in the Eastern Pacific, so maybe that's a sign of La Nina weakening. If you look at that in terms of the SOI, you could definitely assume that maybe we're beginning to weaken with our La Nina, because look at where we were with the SOI just a month ago in late December. The 30-day average was all the way at positive 14, and now today, or at least the latest updated as of today, the 30-day average is now in the negative territory. And that's very significant because when it comes to the SOI, we always talk about how positive means more of an atmospheric correlation with La Nina, while once we get into the negatives, that's more of an atmospheric correlation with El Nino. So we've definitely seen a weakening of the SOI. Recently, the 90-day average is still positive, but definitely lower than it was a few weeks ago. So the SOI has taken a hit. Probably makes sense, especially when you look at the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Pacific, definitely warmed up. And you can even see that with the Nino 3.4 map from Cyclonic Weather. Look at that, even from December when we were at below negative zero point 0.1 degrees Celsius in the Nino 3.4. Compare that to where we are now. Definitely warmed up quite a bit. So we took a hit in the La Nina. Maybe we're beginning to weaken with this La Nina as we move further and further into the winter. And we could see that as well with the T-depth anomalies. Although this is a very interesting thing, is especially since December, there is quite a bit of cold below the Pacific, and especially in December when we reached our peak, the cold pool right below the Pacific, because this is, by the way, the T-depth anomalies, meaning the anomalies that we see below the surface of the ocean. Because, for instance, this map is a picture of all the sea surface temperature anomalies on the surface, as you could obviously see. But this map is pretty much a cross-section of taking the anomalies along the equatorial Pacific and kind of showing what it looks like below the surface. So we could see not only is it cold, but how much does that cold extend below the surface. So that's pretty much a summary of what this map shows. And you can see that there is quite a bit of cold below the equatorial Pacific, kind of what I've been saying, or at least what I've been trying to say. And then you can also see right here in this top right corner, there's been some warm anomalies. But it's very interesting because if you look at this map, you would assume that, oh, maybe La Nina is weakening, and we're starting to see more of a warmer ENSO take shape across the equatorial Pacific. But when you actually look at it in terms of a cross-section, you'll see all this warmth that we're seeing in the eastern Pacific, especially along the surface. It really is only surface level, and if you look just right below that, a very expansive pool of deep below normal sea surface temperature anomalies. So I guess maybe this is just a product of the fact that we've had maybe weaker trades over the last several weeks. Obviously, the SOI took a hit, so maybe that caused some warming in the eastern Pacific. But below that, there's still a supply for cold sea surface temperature anomalies to kind of hold up whatever La Nina we have ongoing right now in the Pacific. So we'll see. Does the SOI continue to go down and eventually maybe erode some of this cold pool, or will we have trade winds return and maybe La Nina might continue on for just a little longer? We'll see, but it'll all be interesting, especially when it comes to the rest of the winter and to spring. And eventually, the big question will be, does La Nina persist through the winter and spring? And we generally remain in a colder ENSO heading into hurricane season, or will eventually all of this warm up and we head more towards El Nino? Questions all to be answered in the next coming weeks, but nothing more than things that we have to keep in mind for right now, because we can't really answer them right now. It's going to be what we answer in a few weeks. Moving on, though, from tropics, let's go to United States weather now. There's quite a bit happening, especially when you look at the watches and warnings across the United States. Boy, is there a lot happening in the Northwest. Very, very cold weather. We talked about cold being with us, especially throughout the eastern and northern parts of the United States for the majority of this month, and certainly that is happening now. Extreme cold warnings. This is not just cold, this is extreme cold warnings in effect for portions of the northern Midwest, especially the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and even it looks like some of these mountainous areas throughout the Northwest and even throughout the South too. It seems like the far northern mountains or in the higher elevations, there's the risk for extreme cold. And we even see freeze warnings extend as far south as Texas. So very widespread cold weather. And with that, we have a winter storm in the east once again. And this time we have widespread winter storm warnings that did go in effect, extending all the way as south as North Carolina, all the way up to Maine. We're going to see quite a bit of accumulating snow. This is not going to be, a huge snow dumper that brings areas that have well over a feet of snow. It's not going to be one of those systems, but it is going to bring a few inches depending on where you are, including the coast of the Northeast. And I actually have the snow map, at least for my area, New York. Places along Long Island, even New York City, could get as much as 5 inches of snow. So this will be a decent snow system for all. It's not going to be like something that's exclusive to just inland. But inland, obviously, the totals will be higher, especially over portions of northern New Jersey. Expect maybe as much as 7 to even 8 inches of snow. So pretty decent amount of snow. Not going to be a huge snow dumper like one of those classic huge winter storms that we read about in the history books, but it'll certainly be a pretty decent snow system. And it's going to move in over the next several hours, especially tonight into tomorrow morning. And that'll definitely have an impact on the evening commute tonight and obviously the morning commute, especially tomorrow. So if you're traveling, be sure to stay safe. And if you don't have to travel at all, please stay home. But you can see on the GFS, system moves in, the snow really kind of heightens over portions of the Mid-Atlantic tonight. And then the system is pretty fast moving. It's not too strong, which is why we're not seeing many areas that'll probably be over a foot, that'll have over a foot of snow. This is not like a 970 millibar low deepening just off the coast of Long Island, with blizzard conditions right along the coast. But it'll be a pretty decent system. Definitely going to drop a few inches of snow depending on where you are. Then it moves pretty quickly off to the northeast, brings snow to most of New England, especially. Seems like the jackpot will, depending on where you are, will be right along the coast, especially if you're in New England and in southern Maine. The closer to the coast you are, the more snow you'll get. And then by tomorrow afternoon and evening, the system will move out. And obviously what will remain is cold air that'll be in place for the next several days across generally the entire eastern United States. And you can see the cold air in place because notice here, just around 2.5 to 3 days out, some sort of small winter system begins to develop for right along the Gulf Coast, not the South in general, but literally right along the Gulf Coast. Seems like a snow system begins to develop there, although whatever low pressure develops kind of gets booted quickly out to sea, so this won't turn into some big southeastern snow event. But regardless, looks like if you're right along the southwestern Gulf Coast, especially in Texas and Louisiana, you might get your chance for some snow. And that actually looks like there might be a decent amount of snow for those, depending on where you are in Texas and Louisiana later this week as we head towards midweek. And then that system moves out. And then it looks like, at least according to the GFS, another system moves just off the coast, and it looks like it brings some snow to areas right along the mid-Atlantic coast. And generally, what I'm trying to point out is you could see in the models a lot of blue beginning to show up, especially in terms of systems near the coast and in general in the United States. And you can even see it. Look at all this lake effect snow, and seemingly a lot of these snow showers that remain generally means there's a lot of cold air in place, especially across the east. And you can even see this with this high pressure. This is definitely a cold high, and you can see as well by these isobars, lots of cold air being drawn in from the north, being brought south. And you can see by the Climate Prediction Center as well, they hint at this very cold weather to be with us for the next week to 10 days. And that extends all the way into the end of January, and it especially is prominent across the South, but generally the entire U.S. will have generally colder than normal temperatures. So maybe we might see, and if you look further than the next 6 to 10 days, cold weather does remain beyond that as well. So generally, cold weather in place. Could we get some more snow opportunities, especially if you're in the east? We'll see, but the pattern generally does look favorable. It's, of course, obviously about whether or not we could get the low pressure or any low pressure system to align properly and get a perfect setup so where we do actually get snow. We'll see, especially after this system looks like we might get that's going to bring snow to the mid-Atlantic today. Will we see something else beyond this? We'll have to see over the next week. And then finally, when it comes to severe weather, obviously, because there is a lot of cold air in place, not a lot of warm weather, especially across the South, only very limited severe weather, which is obviously good. There is a marginal risk for portions of Florida today, but that is just about it. And then we look at no significant severe weather at all for at least the next several days in the U.S., so that is good. But there is the risk for fire weather once again, especially for those in southwestern California. And really quickly, going back to the watches and warnings, there are indeed red flag warnings in effect for portions of southwestern California. Certainly not good news, especially with what's happened there over the last several weeks. But obviously, we have warnings in effect. Heed them, especially given that there are a lot of areas that are very vulnerable right now, given the wildfire events that have happened over the last several weeks in Southern California, especially in LA. So we're looking at another event of potentially high winds once again, which is why we have those red flag warnings. So if you're in the area, and if you know people in the area, especially around southwestern California, notify them and tell them to be on the lookout, because it looks like conditions for wildfires and for heightened wildfire risk looks like those conditions are concerning, which is not good news once again, especially for those in Southern California reeling from the effects of the wildfires we've had there in recent weeks. But hopefully everybody stays safe. And once again, when it comes to tropics, we'll continue to do these weekly tropical weather outlooks every single week. So if you look forward to them, I would really appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe on my videos. Share with family and friends as well, especially with that, because I am potentially looking at doing more weather videos instead of just these weekly tropical weather videos every week, since we're not in hurricane season right now and there's definitely a lot happening with winter weather. So I'll be trying to do more of these videos throughout the week instead of doing one weekly video on the tropics. So if you're interested in that, definitely recommend to stay tuned and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and we will talk again very soon.